Holla ballers, what's going on? It's Preacher, and it is that time to rank the tank classes. We're starting with the tanks this time round. I've done TDPs, which are the daily sort of videos that we make with some gameplay in there. They're all very available. I'll link them down below so you can see some of the gameplay in action. Let's put some caveats before we do the list, though. We are going to do these in list order. This list is based on gameplay. It's whether or not I enjoy playing it or not. That's how we do this stuff in beta. So we take all the talents from what looks to be the best setup to the worst setup, and we play around with the tanks in that way. That's what we've done over the past few months here in BfA, assuming, because of course numbers can change. It's not about what is best tank. We don't know that yet. We know Blizzard is aiming to have all the tanks be pretty homogenous. That means that you should be able to pick whatever the hell you want to be your tank, and that should be fine for all content, right? Now, traditionally, that's not really worked out, and I can say in raid testing that hasn't worked out quite the way Blizzard wants yet. So in terms of what is the best talent, what is doing the best damage, what is taking the least damage, all that kind of stuff is a numbers game, and that's the stuff that will be changing very, very close to the end of BfA. Another one is BfA is still a couple of months away. There are a couple. There's a spec in here that doesn't have a talent yet, which is the Prot Warrior. But we are a couple of months away. Like, we are getting close to crunch time, certainly for people to start re-rolling. It's unlikely we're going to see any major gameplay changes. There have some been announced for the Prot Paladin. I'm going to take that into account. Don't worry. They're not live yet, but we do know how they're going to play out. Blizzard has announced that, so we'll see that there. Basically, all I'm saying is this is the best we can do right now. If there is any major gameplay changes that do happen, we will update the list. But as of right now, this is where it is. So please bear in mind, this is purely gameplay orientated. Whether or not one takes more damage right now in BfA and another one doesn't isn't really relevant to what we're discussing here today. That's not what we're after. We're after which ones are fun to play, which ones are interesting to play, which ones do we enjoy. So let's get our list started then. At number 6, it is the Guardian Druid, and that is the worst of the bunch as far as I'm concerned. Why is it so bad is the obvious question most people ask. The only reason is it does nothing interesting at any point, and I've tried everything to try and have some fun with this spec, and I just can't. It's about the most bare bones and bland tanking spec I can possibly imagine. After looking at various discords and checking into threads discussing this, it's a very loosely discussed spec I would consider compared to the other tanks, and that's because there's just not that much to say about it. It only has really 4 offensive abilities for the most part. 2 of them are essentially duplicates of each other in the sense of thrash and swipe, and the third one, which we could say is maul, which now just does damage and is super expensive at 45 rage, is something that is kind of rarely used unless you're having threat issues, because you're going to be using your rage defensively on Ironfur and stuff. Now, we are going to be discussing the tanks in the world of the global cooldown. Now, the global cooldown does affect every single spec in the game. It's a universal change, but I will make some mention of global cooldowns in here where I think it's relevant. So it is interesting that Ironfur is off the global cooldown. That makes it quite nice to press while you're tanking away and doing things. But other than that, without the claws of Ursoc, which was a nice ability to stop you being knocked back and all that kind of stuff, there's nothing here. Like, popping Incarnation just means you're spamming Mangle, which is kind of what you were doing anyway. Looking through any talent, there's no interest here. The most interesting spell you can hope for here is Galactic Guardian, spamming some Moonfire or some Lunar Beam, something like that, which makes things slightly different. It's just an extra button to press. But it's about as bare bones and as bland as it gets, unfortunately. So I don't have fun playing it. Do I struggle playing it? No, you can play this and have fun with it. It's relatively simple, which is a plus for a lot of people. So I would say, for me, the Guardian Druid does fall in at number 6 because it's just not there. There's nothing happening with it. Next up, I'm going to put the Prot Paladin here, even with the proposed changes that Blizzard have announced recently. So the Prot Paladin comes in at number 5. My issue with the Prot Paladin is that it's just far too basic. Far too basic. While the Guardian Druid is also basic, the Paladin does have the advantage of having some very nice visuals, which I do think is important. So for a class you're going to be potentially investing an entire expansion into, having some nice visuals is very fun. The spells are still quite fun. Avenger's Shield, even after all this time, is still a very, very fun and useful spell to have with its ranged interrupt and pulling things together. You still have that group support in the terms of being able to put freedom on people, sacrifice on people, hand of protection on people, things like that. those are all really fun. You can still do some bubble stuff and some interesting things that a prop paladin can do. It's just far too simplistic. Now, some of the changes that are coming for this are changing it from the whack-a-mole style. And the whack-a-mole style right now is, for the most part, your buttons don't matter that much. You're just basically going to press whatever's not on cooldown because there's no reason not to. So the way they're going to alter that in the future is by having a much longer duration consecration with a far shorter cooldown. That means that you don't have to be spamming things like consecration as soon as it comes off cooldown to keep it down. Now you'll be able to drop one, focus on other things, and then move to a new location and drop a new consecration without worrying about it running out and you not getting any benefits and things of being inside that. I will say some nice changes are Shield of the Righteous no longer requiring a target. You can cast it wherever. Really nice for when you're pulling bosses. Very, very cool for when you're pulling bosses because you can avoid being smacked in the face in the first couple of seconds. Any raid tank worth his salt will be aware of those kinds of scenarios, and Shield of the Righteous being able to be activated as you're running in is a really good touch, similar to Warriors putting shield block up, things like that, and just having that little bit of protection as you engage what potentially a very, very hard-hitting boss and being ready to go off the bat. The recent post from Blizzard, though, does mention, or doesn't, actually notorious by its absence, is the change to Light of the Protector, which is the self-heal for the prop paladins. Ever since they changed that to being on the global cooldown, usually people do talent into Hand of the Protector because it's just universally better than the other talents in its row. And also a big part of why people enjoyed the prop paladin in Legion, I'm not speaking for everyone of course, is the ability to off-heal the group. They could not waste their self-heal or leave it on cooldown and just leave it sat there doing nothing. Instead, they could off-heal the group in many scenarios. While their mitigation was good, they were taking very little damage. Obviously, the way dungeons and stuff work now in Legion and continuing into BfA is actually the trash and the effect on the group that is more important. So Paladins particularly really enjoyed being able to heal the group. Now that is on the global cooldown and it interferes with your general play. Now what I'm getting from the changes that are coming, which is you won't need to spam your abilities as much as possible, this whack-a-mole style of gameplay, is I think they suspect that will free you up in terms of you not having to be pressing any other buttons, so you can do that even though it's on the global cooldown. That's the impression I'm getting from their changes as well. If you have trouble fitting global cooldown heals into your rotation, we're not going to change the global cooldown. In fact, we're going to change your entire rotation to free you up in order to do that. That's not a kind of change I wanted to see, because that's not what people were asking for, because there was a reason they liked it the way it was. And not only that, any tank worth his salt, I've tanked probably for about 9 years of my time in World of Warcraft, is sometimes things go wrong, and they go wrong quickly, and the point of a good tank is being able to respond and adapt to that in possibly under the global cooldown in order to rescue the situation. Ardent Defender is still there for you, but it might be something as simple as just giving a prop-up heal to either yourself or someone else. There are many times, and you will feel it very quickly in BfA, unless this changes between now and release, that not being able to throw out that heal very, very quickly and just propping yourself up, or everything else is on cooldown, and you have this mitigation ability there, that you're just not able to get it off and you will die. And that's not a good feeling, because previously you would have been able to deal with this, and now you can't, and that's pretty much the end of the story. So I think the gameplay will cheer up. It's still a very simple tank. I think it's a really great go-to tank for new players or players who are struggling with dealing with lots of mechanics in a raid encounter and things like that, and just being a generally good all-purpose round tank. I think it fits that niche really well. Gameplay-wise, though, I just find it a little too boring. Next in at number 5, and I actually rate at number 4, sorry. I actually rate number 4 and number 3 pretty much the same. There's no big distinction between here, but you guys would lynch me if there wasn't an order. That's going to be the Blood Death Knight. Now, the Blood DK is something that I play on live. I do Mythic Argus on my Blood DK every single week, and now I'm rating it as one of the lower tanks in terms of gameplay. There's nothing fun here again. It's the same story. There's nothing really interesting or enticing about this anymore. Whereas in Legion, it did carry not only grips, which are fantastic, but they're a little old hat now. They're still amazing. There's no getting away from that. But also the mixing of being able to do consumption and being able to pull off wonderful things, and a really nice smooth flowing gameplay. There are talent setups, which is what's moved it up the list, that kind of make it a little bit smoother, but again, similar to what I said with the prop paladin, having talents which sort of offset the base problems that exist with the spec is not something I enjoy. I do not like having to spec my tank to make it feel like it's interesting or flows correctly. Not interesting is not the right word. Looking for talents that just make it feel like it plays like it should play, rather than it being falling over itself and it just having this masses of downtime which you can run into. I guess this is a good point to mention, is like, it's just because of low haste, Mike. It's just because of low haste in early gear. What I can tell you is that I've done all the mythic raid testing where your gear is scaled up to what you should be wearing when doing mythic raiding in BfA, which means your stats are much higher than you would have on a base character, and we're not seeing it. We're not seeing that haste, etc., is speeding up the specs sufficiently to make it as anywhere close. I mean, I'm not talking about, like, I want it as end game Legion. No one's saying that. Obviously, at the end game, end of expansion, our stats are hyper inflated. I'm not asking for that. What we're saying is we're not seeing anything that's offsetting the need to kind of spec to make this, to choose talents. Let me rephrase that: to choose talents which make the spec flow correctly. For me anyway, I've lost a lot of love this. Again, it kind of falls down to this Guardian prop pally. Is it does the job? Does it do it well or interesting? Not particularly. I don't find Rune Strike interesting, or Hemostasis, or Ossuary, or any of those things. Basically, they back up the things I was already doing and try to make the spec workable. But it does carry grips. It does carry AoE grip as standard. It does carry all those things, and those are very cool things. It still has good abilities. Vamp Blood is still amazing, which is why it pushes itself up to here. So simultaneously, like I say, I put these two on par with each other. I'm going to put the Prot Warrior in at number 3. And this, I know Slooty, we kind of jibe each other back and forth about this because he really doesn't like it. But for me, I find this very enjoyable. The Prot Warrior, I've done a number of videos on the Prot Warrior because it's been the most consistently changed spec, and I will point out here it is still missing a talent, so this is still something that could change, and if it changes again I will revisit it, but right now I will explain why I think this is a relatively fun tank to play. So the recent return of Ignore Pain has both been expensive and interesting because the numbers don't seem particularly great on it right now, but again, as I remind you, this is not a numbers video. That's not what I'm interested in. The addition of Bolster, along with Indomitable and Never Surrender, in the same tier, making interesting choices. They've added a lot of stuff baseline, like baseline Shockwave, changing us from Recklessness to Avatar, which I find more interesting to use because it removes roots and things, which can be very dangerous for tanks. We still have the ability to leap and charge and have that wonderful mobility that warriors are known for, and I was certainly, every time I play this, I'm zipping around and I'm having fun. Now, my big problem with the Prot Warrior before Ignore Pain Return is that Rage didn't seem to mean anything. And I think that's a big problem. You can't have a resource on a class that only has one resource and have that resource be practically irrelevant. That's not fun for anybody. So the problem was you were either flooded with Rage and you didn't really have anything to spend it on because we only had Bolster and Shield Block. Shield Block has a recharge time and Bolster lasts for a relatively long time in terms of 10 seconds. So what you could do is just randomly dump Rage into spells that were crazy expensive should you press the wrong button. So you just generally held onto it unless you were like capped on Rage, and it was like, well, I might as well bash another button. Not because you wanted to, not because that was interesting, but because you just had all this resource and nothing to do with it. You might as well have been Richie Rich. I've got billions upon billions or trillions of dollars. I might as well spend some of it because honestly, does it matter if I don't? That's what it felt like, and that's really uninteresting. That's a terrible way for a resource. Your resource should matter. With the return of Ignore Pain, though, your resource absolutely does matter because you can set up some cool things that make you feel strong and make you feel like you made the right decision, and that's a satisfying reward for me. That's what I look for in my gameplay. Did I make the right decision? So you can do things like Shield Block with a Bolster and then put an Ignore Pain on top of it and prevent some really heavy blows, but you have to manage your Rage correctly in order to pull that off at the right time. That's what I really like about tanking, and if you do it wrong, you're going to take some extra damage, and maybe you're going to learn from that and get something better. So those are really good. Whether or not the numbers will pan out and make that work out, I don't know. I will say Ignore Pain and Bolster are still on the global cooldown, which makes it a little awkward to set up even if you know something's coming, but this is in a world without boss timers, so that is annoying. It absolutely is annoying. Is it perfect? No, not by any means. It is not perfect, but I still find it fun. Zipping around, having good fun, spell reflecting, doing all that kind of stuff, having a good stun, a self-heal, which always seems to proc at just the right time for the most part. It's like, I really need a heal, and then you manage to get that self-heal with that impending victory. All that kind of stuff makes it an interesting spec to play. I have a good amount of choices. I have a good different assortment of tools to use that don't really do all the same thing, which is something a lot of other tanks suffer from. Is like, well, I have a self-heal and I have an armor bonus, and that's about it. Now I've got things that do magic. I have things where I want to spend my rage in a certain way. If I'm taking a big magical hit, putting bolster on myself, which increases my armor, isn't going to do a great deal. I want to use it in other situations. Maybe instead I want to use it on spell reflect and ignore pains and get those ready instead. Those kind of choices I find way more interesting in the way BfA tanking is taking place, so that's why the Prot Warrior finds itself there. But again, it's still undergoing some changes that could drop. It could make it better. Who knows, right? Who knows? Right, number 1 and 2. Number 1 and 2. These are pretty close. I've replayed these multiple times today. Hi to the people I bumped into while I was playing these specs. But at number 2, I'm going to put the Brewmaster. The Brewmaster is pretty much, as in most tank classes, they're pretty much the same as Legion, but slightly worse is a good way of describing it, I think. They're missing some stuff, some pace, some intricacies that are in Legion, but they're not here in BfA, mainly through the loss of the artifact weapons, which is the ability and all the stuff that went with it. Some stuff has been baked in, but overall, the Brewmaster has a really good pace to it. It's nice, it's interesting, it's not too fast, which the Brewmaster could get very, very spammy, particularly towards the end of Legion. Your fingers were like on fire playing Brewmaster sometimes because you were working so hard. The talents are interesting. You still got Blackout combo in there. You still got all these other abilities that keep you interested in what you're pressing and add urgency and some good weight to each button you press. That's really nice. You get good decisions to make if you're going to utilize talents like that. You have other talents with Elusive Dance and things like that in order to make good sense of things. There's still some high-level intricacies that exist with the Brewmaster, and that makes it really interesting for me. It also plays really well on a relatively simple level. Even if you're not into these high-level intricacies and you're just doing some normal content, you're still a whirling dervish of rushing Jade Winds and keg smashes and breathing fire and doing all these cool things on top of that, where you don't really need to know every single mathematical detail that this tank has to offer, but maybe you can get up there at some point. Maybe you can progress from there. There's a path you can travel with the Brewmaster to learn ever increasing more about it. Why is Black Ox Brew better in certain situations? Or light brewing? Which one do I really want? Managing something like Iron Skin Brew, and also sharing this charge system with Purifying Brew, which is the correct choice at the right time. All these things are stuff you can work towards that you don't necessarily need when you get started, and the Brewmaster still encapsulates all those things for me. At the same time, it's just really fun. It's a really, really fun. It's fast. It's got good mobility. It's teleporting. It can absorb massive hits. It can do all kinds of very cool things while still keeping the simple look to it. And that's why it's hit that number 2 spot. I have fun with this. So similar with the Prot Warrior, that's where I have a lot of fun. I'm just enjoying playing it. And I think that's enough for a lot of people. Which obviously leads us to number 1. No surprises by anybody, but I know some people will probably call hypocrite here, but I will explain it, which shouldn't be a surprise to most of my viewers. Is number 1 is the Vengeance Demon Hunter. So recently, Vengeance, seemingly the most popular tank right now on BfA, and unsurprisingly, because it is absolutely tremendous fun to play all the time. It's not surprising that you see people quickly check things out and then gravitate in certain directions, and I'm seeing so many people gravitate towards either monks or Vengeance Demon Hunters while still keeping a Blood DK dream alive for the most part, is what I'm seeing. While they only carry very few abilities, comparative to some of the other tanks, they have very few abilities, sometimes a half or a third of what the other tanks actually carry. The way it utilizes those spells is really a good sign of more modern WoW class design, which is where they realized, similar to what's happening in other games, is we don't actually need a whole bunch of abilities if we make the abilities fun and interesting on their own. There's no point in having, and a good comparison here, I know it's a bit premature, would be something like the Arms Warrior, which has like 5 different attacks that all feel and do the same thing. That's not interesting or fun. What I want is less abilities that are more fun, and the Vengeance Demon Hunter has that in spades. It absolutely has that in spades. The sigils themselves all work in very different ways. There's only 4 of them, and you can duplicate one of them in multiple different ways, but each one of them has its place and its purpose, and it's fun and interesting to use. Not only that, it just gained Purge, the ability to remove magical spells from enemies. They took that away from the DKs, which blew my mind, and gave it to the Demon Hunters in the form of Consume Magic, which is a wonderful ability to have as a tank. There is nothing more horrific than doing a dungeon group in a pug, especially, and you know that the thing you're tanking is going to kill you because it has some magical buff that the priest or the shaman is not removing. Now you could getting rid of that, and I've utilized this a whole bunch. There's lots of things in BfA that gain these magical buffs that like triple their HP, like absorb shields and things, and being able to remove that for the rest of the group is a very satisfying, great feeling. Not only that, most of Demon Spikes is off the global cooldown, which is really nice, because that's your go-to mitigation. It flows really nicely into play. You can, similar to the Paladins, activate it without a target, so you can go into combat already having your mitigation active. The other mitigation choices are quite cool in terms of Last Resort or Soul Barrier, whichever one you want to use. You still have the choices of abilities and how you want to generate pain. I still hate the names. I still hate the names. But generating your pain, or whether you want to generate less pain at a slower rate and then work out what to do with it later. How do you want to gain your souls so you can actually utilize them in some way? Do you want to shatter them with immolation auras, or what do you want to do? This is a very, very fun, cool spec, and the talents, for the most part, not everybody has perfect talents by any means. Not everybody has perfect talents, but the talents for the most part are pretty good. They're pretty good. They keep you engaged. They keep you interested. It doesn't go too fast. It doesn't go too slow. It seems to work out really nicely for everything you want. And I've never had as much fun. I played it again just before recording this, and I was like, this is just so much better. That was the thought in my head, is like, this is just so much more interesting and fun to play than anything else. Even if I'm tanking a large boss, which is usually boring for a lot of the tank specs, I'm still having fun. I'm still leaping on the spot if I want to. I'm still managing all my cooldowns effectively. I have good choice for magic and a good choice for physical, whichever it is I want to use. The self-healing component works well with how it does, because you have to sacrifice it if you want to build up souls, unless you are soul fragments, and then you want to work them back. All these choices are cool. It doesn't need a whole bunch of buttons, and some people seem to think that I'm intent on a good class has 50 buttons to press. That's not true. It can have way less stuff to do as long as that stuff is interesting, and the talents all modify what those existing abilities do without just sticking on more abilities. You can, of course, add more abilities with the Vengeance Demon Hunter, but for the most part, the talent systems just modify the existing way the current buttons work in an interesting way. It's not similar to, say, a Blood DK is like stacking up more bone shield will give you more HP. It's like, oh, that's not that fun. Do I want more leech when I pop into meta on a more general basis, or do I want to do feed the demon because I've got more regular big hits coming in, things like that? Those are the choices I want that suit the encounter. So for me, I guess we have to shout here, the absolute mega mobility of this spec is extraordinary. It's so fun all the time. It's just so fun leaping around, turning into a demon. It is fun, and it always has been. So the Vengeance Demon Hunter I'm rating at #1 for BfA. If you want good fun gameplay, that's where it's at. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I'll see you again. Bye bye.